At face value, the Star Trek The Original Series episode The Omega Glory is a below-average episode whose ending just seems absolutely implausible and ridiculous. What makes this episode even more bizarre, though, is the fact that it was actually written by Gene Roddenberry himself, and doesn't seem to reflect the Gene vision at all. Or does it? Well, today we'll find out. Hello and welcome to Backtrack, a web series that focuses on the background information on any given topic in Star Trek. In this episode, we're taking a look at the Star Trek The Original Series episode The Omega Glory to better understand its place in Star Trek history. Recently, a longtime fan of the channel, Ben, who himself has a channel here on YouTube called TenShine1 Productions, began a discussion with me about this episode, The Omega Glory. And thanks to that discussion, I was inspired to make this video on an episode that, to be honest, I didn't like very much, but also had no plans to make anytime soon. The problem for me with this episode was that rather than being so bad it was good, or even so bad that it stuck out in my mind, it simply was just so bad that it was forgettable. This story was written by none other than Gene Roddenberry himself. It was actually one of the 3 stories considered for the second pilot of the series, the other 2 being Mudd's Women and, of course, Where No Man Has Gone Before. The original draft of the script had the Enterprise finding the missing starship named the USS Argentina. The landing party sent to the starship would have consisted of Kirk, Spock, a young navigator named Lieutenant Commander Piper, a helmsman named Lieutenant Phil Raintree, and the new ship's doctor named Milton Perry. Perry and Raintree would be killed during the events on the planet's surface, and at the climax of the episode, Kirk was to fight Captain Tracy in a Western-style gunfight, during which Tracy would shoot Spock twice. Spock, however, would survive because of the different anatomy of the Vulcan species, Spock's heart not being in his chest in the same spot as a human would have it. It would also have featured a B-plot, which was intended as comic relief, making the Enterprise's computer have a female personality, the exact same aspect and plot point that was used in the Season 1 episode Tomorrow is Yesterday. NBC was not fond of this episode idea at all. In fact, when Roddenberry suggested that it should be an early episode in Season 1, NBC ordered it shelved, never to see the light of day again. Roddenberry himself, not wanting to let something he wrote be forgotten, would constantly try to have this episode made throughout the next year and a half of production. And despite NBC still objecting to it, Roddenberry finally had his way and was allowed to make it late in the second season. Les and Tina Pine were assigned by Roddenberry to write the teleplay based on his previous outlines and scripts. However, their finished product was not up to Roddenberry's standards, and so Gene decided to develop the project further himself. A little bit of Trek trivia for you here. Once completed, Gene Roddenberry himself thought so highly of this story that he had crafted, he actually personally submitted it for Emmy consideration. Of course, it really wasn't considered at all. Bob Justman also had a huge problem with this episode. The usual procedure would have been for Bob to write a memo and send it around to Roddenberry and all involved, and then everyone would CC each other until all the issues were worked out. In this case, however, Justman would not do that. After writing the very long memo, Justman felt it would simply be too devastating to Roddenberry, and so instead opted to merely discuss all the plot points with Gene face to face. Gene listened, nodded, and then for the most part ignored all of Justman's points. One thing that would be changed, however, was in regards to Captain Tracy himself. As in a scene after encountering Tracy on the planet's surface, it was to be revealed that Tracy, an important Starfleet captain, was racist against Vulcans. That didn't seem to jibe with Roddenberry's previous assertions that humanity of the future didn't feel or act that way. And after a long argument with Roddenberry, Justman prevailed, and these lines were cut from the script. Another bit of Trek trivia for you all is that in this episode, McCoy says that human beings are about 96% water. This is inaccurate, however, as the actual figure is closer to 70%. Vincent McKevity directed this outing into the Star Trek universe, and given what he had to work with, did a good enough job in all respects. Vincent directed 6 episodes of the original series, including Balance of Terror, Dagger of the Mind, and Spectre of the Gun. Morgan Woodward would return to Star Trek in this episode as Captain Ronald Tracy. He had also guest starred in the episode Dagger of the Mind, where he played the crazy Dr. Simon Van Gelder. Roy Jensen would play the role of Cloud William in this episode. Jensen was Canadian-born and had a huge career playing mostly guest roles, utilizing his large and imposing body stature. His voice would be electronically altered in this episode. Irene Kelly would play the role of Cloud Williams' companion Sira. Kelly's acting career was sporadic at best, never really making it into a career option for herself, and by 1978 she would stop acting altogether. Another interesting little piece of Trek trivia for you all is in regards to Lieutenant Galloway. David L. Ross played the character, and he would later return as Lieutenant Johnson in Day of the Dove, and then once more as Galloway in the episode Turnabout Intruder. No explanation would ever be given as for this character's sudden resurrection, but according to Ross himself, Gene had wanted him to appear regularly in the series, but Ross was not interested in doing that. In fact, another character, despite having been killed off in the earlier episode Obsession, Lieutenant Leslie, would also appear in this episode, beaming down with Sulu and arresting Captain Tracy at the end of the episode. The Omega Glory ended up being more of a mess than anything else, and is an interesting case study for Roddenberry as a human being. After all, according to Gene himself, the Federation is an arms-open, accepting-all utopia of the future. Yet here in this episode, Gene purposely and clearly made a very patriotic episode. Now, I'm not saying that Gene didn't love the US of A, just that his own personal politics tended to be more towards the communistic way of thinking. However, the Omega Glory would go on to explore the idea of a parallel Earth development, something which would be recycled over and over again throughout the original series. But Gene took this one a bit too far, as anyone with half a brain knows that to parallel Earth so specifically, with things such as the American flag, star for star, and the Constitution, among so many other things, would be impossible. And because of this point, many in fandom merely shrugged off this episode with a big meh, and will oftentimes avoid watching it altogether. The remastered version of this episode would actually bring the space scenes to life, adding great shots of both the Enterprise and the USS Exeter, that wouldn't have been possible in the original version of the episode because of budgetary and time constraints. There were many things in this episode that could have been done a lot better, and make a lot more sense. Having had contact and been contaminated by another starship before the Exeter showed up, for example, would have solved the problem of the American flag and the Constitution. But Roddenberry felt his work, as is, was perfect, and was very proud of what he had written. Harlan Ellison once wrote about Roddenberry that he had only 2 tricks in his writing bag, one being parallel Earths, and the second being fake gods showing up to terrorize a crew. And Harlan was probably right. Both of these plots show up time and time again, not just throughout Roddenberry's Star Trek career, but also in so many of the other shows he would try to sell in the future. The Omega Glory had all the elements required to become a great episode for the original series. A great new starship captain, violation of the Prime Directive, our heroes being captured, a fight to the death, and so on and so forth. But the moment you put it in those terms, the problem becomes instantly clear, as those plot elements have been used so many times by this point in Star Trek's history that they merely seem like old hat. Then when you add in that episodes like The Doomsday Machine and a piece of the action had done these various plot elements in a much better way, And it is very understandable why the Omega Glory never became the dream episode that Gene wanted, and why fandom turned away from it entirely. Watching this episode over and over again for this video, I was really hoping that maybe time had healed this particular wound, or that I'd find something so relevant that it would justify this episode in my own mind. But sadly, that did not happen. Instead, I merely watched in a sort of daze, looking at the TV, then at the clock, then back at the TV again, repeating this until the episode's end, and to me that's very sad. For the Omega Glory is neither a great or even a good episode, or one so bad to really be dived into and discussed. And in my opinion, there is no greater disappointment to a writer than a classification of middle of the road.
Captain's log, aboard the USS Exeter. What could have happened to the over 400 men and women who were on this ship?
Jim, the crew didn't leave. They're still here.
Wu is 462 years old. His father is well over 1,000. They sacrificed hundreds just to throw us out in the open. We killed thousands and they still came. Fight is done when one is dead. We gotta do something.
This is Captain Kirk. Is there anyone on board?
Of all their missions,
The crew didn't leave. Something crystallized them.
If you've come aboard this ship, you're dead men.
nothing has prepared them for this.
My entire crew gone. Without a serum, we're trapped. That's enough of that, Captain. Our tissues show a massive infection. Let's see how eager you are to die. Spock, we gotta do something.
Star Trek.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Backtrack. What do you think of the Omega Glory? How do you feel about what I've said here? Well, leave your comments in the section below. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. Want to help the channel punish those who violate the Prime Directive? Then consider becoming a channel patron. The link to our Patreon account is in the description below. Thanks again for watching. Live long and prosper.